My late-night experience. That night, everything felt like it was perfectly normal. I was just finishing watching a movie, a typical quiet evening. But when my phone rang, something about it felt off. The number wasn't saved and I didn't recognize it. It was late and I was tired, but I thought maybe it was an emergency or something important. When I answered, there was a weird silence, so I asked again, "Hello?" But there was nothing, just a hollow, almost unnoticeable breathing sound. My mind raced, and I tried to convince myself it was a prank. But when I pressed the speaker closer, I realized that the breathing was not just from the phone. It felt like it was coming from the other side of the room. Then came the whisper, so quiet that I thought I might have imagined it. "I see you," the voice said. The calmness of it was what terrified me the most. It wasn't angry or loud, just unsettlingly calm. I remember looking around the room, thinking someone was hiding in the shadows. I hung up immediately, my heart pounding, but I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been watching me. I tried calling the number back, but there was no trace of it, just a disconnected line. And that was the last time I ever received a call from that number. The thought that someone knew where I was and that they had been watching is something that still makes me uneasy. Every time my phone rings from an unknown number, I hesitate. I'll never forget that night. It was so real, so vivid. My brother passed away unexpectedly, and to say I was devastated is an understatement. We were incredibly close, so I felt his loss deeply. I was sitting alone, staring at his photo, when my phone suddenly rang. I didn't even have to check the number. I could see his name right there on the screen. I froze. It didn't make sense. How could this be? My brother was gone. I hesitated, but finally picked up the phone, thinking maybe it was a family member trying to get in touch. But when I answered, his voice came through. It sounded just like him, but at the same time, it was distorted. "I'm okay. Don't worry about me," he said. But there was something off about the tone. It was too calm, too distant. I felt my stomach drop. I couldn't understand it. Why was he calling me? How was he calling me? I could barely breathe as the call ended, and I was left in complete shock. I called the number back immediately, but the line just rang, and then it went dead. I couldn't understand what had happened. I called my family, and they all said they hadn't contacted me from his phone number. No one knew how or why it had happened. I didn't know what to believe, but I knew it was something I would never forget. To this day, I don't know if it was my grief playing tricks on me, or if it was something far more inexplicable. But the sound of his voice still echoes in my mind, and I never answered a phone call the same way again. My late-night call from a stranger. It started out as a typical prank call, or so I thought. I was sitting in my living room scrolling through my phone when my unknown number popped up on the screen. At first, I rolled my eyes, thinking it was just another teenager trying to prank me. I wasn't even worried. I answered with a casual, "Hello." To my surprise, the voice that came through was cold, low, and chilling. "I'm watching you." I assumed it was just some random caller messing with me, but something about the voice sent a shiver down my spine. The calmness in it felt strange. I hung up without thinking, dismissing it as a weird prank, but not even 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. I answered, and this time, the voice was even more unsettling. "I'm getting closer." And then, in the background, I began to hear faint footsteps. It wasn't like the sound of someone walking casually. It was deliberate, paced, and approaching. I could almost hear the crunch of gravel underfoot, but no one was there. I rushed to the window, pulling the curtains back and scanning outside, but I didn't see anyone. Yet the footsteps continued, growing louder. "I'm right outside," the voice said, and my blood ran cold. I ran to lock all the doors, and when I checked the windows, there was no one. The calls stopped, but my heart was racing. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, pacing, checking every corner of the house, afraid that someone had been watching me, or had somehow been following me without my knowing. It's been years, but I still wonder who that person was. I've never received another call from that number, but every time I hear footsteps outside, I freeze. The fear that someone was actually lurking around my house that night is something I can't shake. A few years ago, I moved into a new apartment. It was a small, quiet place on the outskirts of town. One night, after a long day at work, I was sitting on the couch unwinding when I noticed a missed call from an unfamiliar number. I thought nothing of it and went about my evening. But around midnight, my phone rang again. The same number. This time, my curiosity got the best of me, and I answered. I expected a prank, but what I heard was far from funny. There was complete silence at first. Then, just as I was about to hang up, I heard faint breathing, almost like someone was quietly exhaling into the phone. I stayed quiet, hoping it would stop, but instead, a whisper came through. "I know you're alone." The voice was so calm, so eerie. My heart started racing, and I hung up immediately. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just a sick joke, but something about it stayed with me. The next night, the phone rang again at the same time. I was anxious, but answered, hoping it was nothing. Again, I heard nothing at first, just silence. But then, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, getting closer and closer. My blood ran cold. I didn't know what to do. I looked around the apartment, but there was no one outside the window, no sounds in the hallway. Then, the voice came again, whispering softly, "I'm closer now." I slammed the phone down and locked all the doors, checking every window. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, terrified. The next day, I tried calling the number back, but it went straight to voicemail. I didn't know who was behind those calls or how they knew I was alone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me. The calls stopped after that, but the fear lingered. I never received another call from that number, but every time my phone rang, I hesitated. Even now, I sometimes wonder if I was just being paranoid, or if there was someone really out there, watching, waiting. The memory of those footsteps still haunts me.